Welcome, listener. This is Sebastian Nothwell here to introduce you to my gay Victorian fae romance, Oak King, Holly King. You may have heard the first 2 chapters previously on this very podcast, so please enjoy the 3rd chapter of the audiobook narrated by Gary Furlong. And as always, thank you for listening.
Chapter 3. For the next fortnight, as September passed into October, Wren expected Butcher to descend on Mr. Grigsby's office at any moment. If he were perfectly honest, Wren had to admit he felt more than a little bitter satisfaction in imagining the rest of Quill's reaction to his demand for proof. No doubt it would throw them into fits. He felt still more excitement in imagining what sort of street magic, mesmerism, or conjuring trick Butcher would use to prove his story. To say nothing of how, when Butcher returned to show off his so-called magic, Wren might have the opportunity to glean the man's real name at last. As the days passed, however, and Butcher did not appear, Wren began to fear he'd set his challenge too high for the rest of Quills to meet. Which was a shame, because no matter what his reasons for coming, Wren found he did want to see Butcher again. That imposing figure, those high cheekbones, those dark eyes. Even his wood smoke scent had begun to enter Wren's dreams. Then, on a mid-October morning, the downstairs bell rang at last. Wren leapt out of his chair before it occurred to him to conceal his excitement from his employer. Mr. Grigsby blinked at him. "Are we expecting something particular from the penny post?" "Yes," Wren lied, glad Mr. Grigsby had provided him with a convenient excuse for his behaviour. He went for the door without any further explanation. But as he reached for the latch, the door swung inward of its own accord, and brought an unexpected visitor along with it. "Ah!" Mr. Grigsby exclaimed in genuine delight, which Wren did not share. "Mr. Noll! What a marvellous surprise! Lofthouse, you ought to have told me. But no matter, you are here now and must sit down and take tea with us." "Thank you," said Mr. Felix Noll, a young gentleman of 20 years in a striking blue suit that matched his sapphire eyes. He swept his silk top hat from his lamb-like golden curls and handed it off to Wren without looking at him. "I'm quite famished." Wren resisted the urge to cram the hat into Felix's mouth. Instead, he shut the door behind Felix and put the top hat in the coat closet beside his and Mr. Grigsby's own chapeau and umbrellas. Mr. Grigsby, meanwhile, rose from his own chair to offer it to Felix. "To what occasion do we owe this honour?" "Oh, nothing particular," Felix answered with the exaggerated, casual air that always bespoke his lies. He draped himself across Mr. Grigsby's chair like a house cat in a sunbeam. "Found myself in the neighbourhood. Thought I'd drop in. Then we must give our thanks to Providence for allowing our paths to cross this day," Mr. Grigsby concluded with an indulgent chuckle. As a clerk, Wren feigned to take as little notice in Felix as Felix took in him. As an aspiring artist, however, he remained ever observant, and while he considered himself wise enough not to judge aloud, he knew in his heart he wasn't charitable enough to avoid forming judgments privately. He had formed his judgment of Felix 4 years ago, when the boy had first come under Mr. Grigsby's legal guardianship, and nothing in Felix's behaviour since then had caused him to reconsider that judgment. On the contrary, his conviction only deepened with every minute spent either in Felix's presence or in going through the records of Felix's considerable inheritance. Mr. Grigsby, meanwhile, went to put the kettle on. Mr. Grigsby was not a clumsy man precisely. He didn't often knock over ink bottles or drop his teacup. Yet he moved as if he expected to become clumsy at any moment. A total lack of surety infused his limbs. He might raise his hand towards a ledger twice or thrice without actually touching it before he summoned the conviction to pull it down from the shelf. He did this with a grim determination, suggesting that he fully anticipated the whole shelf would collapse at his fingertips. But have that ledger he must, and so he had resigned himself to his fate. When the shelf did not, in fact, crumble to splinters in front of him, he always seemed pleasantly surprised. At present, Mr. Grigsby employed a similar method when it came to fetching the box of tea down from the shelf where it sat between the years 1815 and 1816 in the endless line of annual rent records. He stood on the tips of his toes to grasp it like a schoolboy flailing at a box of forbidden treats put out of his reach. The 3rd time Mr. Grigsby tried and failed to retrieve the tea, a snort of laughter rang out through the muffled atmosphere of Staple Inn. Mr. Grigsby paused and looked around in puzzlement. By then Felix had already whipped out his handkerchief and turned his laughter into a convincing cough. "The fog is dreadfully thick today," Mr. Grigsby observed. "But never fear. Lofthouse has stopped up all draughts, and a moment by the fire should put you to rights." Felix nodded into his handkerchief, his eyes still sparkling with mirth. Of all Felix's many faults, this was the one that most provoked Wren's wrath. Wren did not, indeed could not, deny that Mr. Grigsby's awkward habits held some humour now and again, but still he felt the least Felix might do would be to wait until he had departed before he indulged in laughter at the expense of his legal guardian and benefactor, who had behaved far better by half towards Felix than Wren felt he deserved. Rather than give young Felix a blistering lecture on gratitude, however, Wren took the empty copper kettle out of the office and down to the water pump in the courtyard. By the time Wren returned, Mr. Grigsby had succeeded in getting the tea-box down from the shelf, and now clasped it before him with perfect contentment as he regaled Felix with his report on the past week's weather. Fog, with intermittent rain, followed by more fog. Felix did a better job at feigning interest than Wren, though Wren suspected this was only because Felix wanted to commit as many of Mr. Grigsby's odd mannerisms to memory as possible, so he might impersonate Mr. Grigsby to amuse his university friends at a later date. Even if Wren didn't already know the boy's character, he would have realized it in a moment from the way Felix kept biting back bursts of laughter and sniffling away his snickering beneath his handkerchief. Wren entered the room without a word, shut the door behind himself with the softest click of the latch, and wove his way around to the two gentlemen to hang the full kettle over the fire. Neither acknowledged his presence, Felix because he did not care, and Mr. Grigsby because he genuinely did not notice, at least not until Wren approached him directly to take the tea-box. "Ah, thank you, Lofthouse," Mr. Grigsby said, handing the tea over with a smile. "Now, Mr. Knoll, we need do nothing more than twiddle our thumbs, for Lofthouse takes care of everything. I don't know what I'd do without him." "Prosper, most like," Wren thought but didn't say. Felix cleared his throat. "Actually, I've just thought of something you may help me with in the meantime." "Oh?" Surprise did not lessen Mr. Grigsby's good humour by one jot. "Name it, my dear boy." "I require an advance of funds from my father's trust," said Felix. For a moment the only sound that permeated the muffling fog of Staple Inn was the crackling of the fire beneath the copper kettle. "Dear me," said Mr. Grigsby, "I'm very sorry to bear bad news, but I'm afraid my hands are tied on the matter. The terms of your father's will are unmistakable. You are to have sufficient funds for your education, and—" Here Mr. Grigsby named a sum that had dizzied Wren the first time he heard it, and infuriated him every instant afterward. "Per semester to live on in a manner befitting your station, and as it comes from the interest of your late father's trust, there is no margin left over from which to draw on. Quite impossible. I hope only the need is not great and the matter not dire." Felix waved off Mr. Grigsby's genuine concern. "Oh, no, nothing pressing. It's just I wanted to buy a particular necklace for Flora as a Christmas present." Wren thought Felix might at least have the decency to look abashed at his own lie, but falsehood altered the young man's fashionable features not a whit. Mr. Grigsby entertained no such suspicions. "How charming! I'm sure it would please Miss Fairfield very much." Wren had never laid eyes on Miss Flora Fairfield in the flesh, but he had seen the miniature Felix kept of her. Indeed, the boy had shown it off to him like a prized racehorse when he'd first received it. From this, Wren knew Miss Flora had pale blue eyes, white blonde hair, and an expression that fell somewhere between astonishment and boredom, though Wren supposed the blame for the latter might fall on the artist rather than the subject. In Wren's opinion, Felix and Miss Flora, with their matching fair hair and blue eyes, bore greater resemblance to a pair of twins rather than a pair of lovers. Indeed, as Mr. Grigsby retained legal guardianship over both of them, one might call them siblings. But since no one asked for Wren's opinion on the match, he expressed it only to his manuscripts. "Unfortunately," Mr. Grigsby continued, "Miss Fairfield's appreciation does not alter the terms of your father's will. However, depending on the jeweller from which you acquire the necklace, it may be possible to pay some small amount at present, and the remainder after the first of the year. Not that I suggest one ought to make it a habit to live on one's debts, but for this singular special instance it might do." Wren had long suspected Felix was no stranger to living on his debts, but kept this to himself, save for a speaking glance at Felix. Felix ignored Wren's accusatory gaze. "I'm afraid this particular jeweller will not make such a bargain with me. Is there absolutely nothing to be done?" "Nothing whatsoever," Mr. Grigsby said solemnly. "But fret not. Christmas is 3 months out, and I'm sure you can think up another equally suitable gift for dear Miss Fairfield before then. And the new year will allow you to withdraw the cost of the necklace from your father's trust. No doubt you have already resolved to tighten your belt to meet the demand, in plenty of time for her birthday, on which occasion I'm sure the necklace will meet with equal appreciation." Mr. Grigsby looked well pleased with the solution he'd drawn up for Felix's supposed predicament. Felix's own smile proved a pale imitation of such satisfaction. Wren saw through it as easily as one might see through a window-pane. And no sooner had Wren thought this than something struck the actual window-pane behind Felix's head. All 3 men whirled towards the sound, though only Wren dashed to the window itself. A bird lay on the sill. It didn't move as Wren unlocked the window and threw it open. Wren supposed it had died in striking the glass. "Sparrow, Lofthouse?" Mr. Grigsby called to him from across the room. "No, sir," said Wren. For indeed it was no sparrow, but something with a fluffy grey coat and little mask of black feathers over its eyes. Some other sort of bird. Just as Wren attempted to scoop its poor corpse onto a scrap of parchment, the black masked eyes blinked open. "Oh!" cried Wren as the bird hopped upright. Despite its passerine shape, the queer little bird had a fierce gaze beneath its mask. It blinked at him several more times, shook itself all over, then hopped onto the parchment, and from there onto the cuff of Wren's jacket. Wren willed himself not to flinch, lest he startle the stunned creature. Just as the bird seemed about to hop up on his elbow and into the office, it blinked at something over his shoulder, then whirled away in a storm of feathers and disappeared into the fog. "It's alive after all?" Mr. Grigsby asked as Wren shut and locked the window. Without waiting for an answer, he continued. "Very good. Far preferable to the inverse outcome, I think we may all agree." Felix belatedly returned Mr. Grigsby's beaming smile. "Yes, well, thank you for the tea. I'm afraid I must be going." "So soon?" asked Mr. Grigsby. Indeed, the kettle had not yet begun to whistle. Wren indulged in a raised eyebrow at Felix's expense. "Yes," said Felix, pointedly avoiding Wren's gaze. "I've just remembered an appointment with another friend in town. Must dash, but thank you for your offer of tea and your advice. I shall use it in good health." With this he made a very pretty bow, which gave Wren enough time to fetch his hat from the cupboard. He handed it over to Felix, who did not trouble himself to thank him. When the downstairs bell rang again the next day, Wren's heart leapt to think Butcher had come at last. He hastened to temper his enthusiasm. More likely it was Felix Knoll returned to make another attempt at his trust fund. Mr. Grigsby, absorbed in his newspaper, took no notice of Wren rising from his desk and crossing the office to answer the door. Yet when Wren ventured into the foyer, he found not Felix Knoll, nor Butcher, but a gentleman with sandy hair, snub nose, and a receding chin propped up by the voluminous folds of his cravat. Wren hurried to shut the door behind himself and hissed down the stair. "Humphreys, what are you doing here?" Indeed, for a member of the restive quills to confront another in his place of work broke all the club's rules of secrecy. Though, since Wren had tendered his resignation, he supposed the tenets of membership no longer applied to him. Humphreys bore a look that strongly implied he didn't care what rules he flouted in that moment. He mounted one foot on the stair and furiously stage-whispered, "What the devil do you mean by sending over such a ridiculous creature to give us your regards?" "What?" said Wren. "When we asked him how he'd found us, he said the bones had shown him the path." "The bones? Is that what you're calling yourself now?" "What?" Wren repeated. "Don't play coy. We all know it was you who set him on us and told him where he might find our gathering place." "Humphreys," Wren said with complete honesty, "I haven't the faintest idea what you're on about." Humphreys scoffed. "You know perfectly well. That actor you hired to play the part of your medieval Dick Turpin, Butcher, he said to call him." Wren stared at him. "Which, while it certainly cuts to the point of the matter, can hardly be considered a particularly clever pseudonym," Humphreys continued. "I'd thought your pride in your craft would demand something more, a pun at the very least." "I didn't hire him," Wren said stupidly. "You hired him." "Me?" Humphreys recoiled from the notion. "The collective you," Wren elaborated, not bothering to disguise his impatience. The farce had gone on long enough. "The restive quills. You hired him to play a prank on me." "We most certainly did not," insisted Humphreys, sounding almost as indignant as Wren felt. "Of all the absurd—" "It is exactly the sort of absurdity in which you all delight," Wren snapped. "Though I'd considered you better gentlemen than to try and convince me it was all my own idea." "Whether or not Butcher was your idea remains to be seen," Humphreys sniffed. "But he certainly wasn't ours." Wren knew he hadn't hired Butcher. However, he also knew that Humphreys couldn't spin a convincing falsehood any more than he could spin dross into gold, or ink into prose for that matter. The man had no capacity for lying, which meant Humphreys at least had nothing to do with Butcher. This by no means cleared the remainder of the restive quills of such a charge. They all knew as well as Wren that Humphreys couldn't lie, and might have wisely chosen to keep Humphreys in the dark as to their actual plans, lest he give the game away. But it did give Wren pause. "What exactly happened?" Wren said slowly. "And when, and where?" "At our last meeting," Humphreys answered. "In the coffee house at Cockspur Street. We were all sitting in our corner of the back room reading the minutes when this Gothic brute stormed in and demanded to know if he'd found the gathering place of the restive quills. Vincent informed him he had and asked how he knew where to find us, and he claimed that the bones had told him, which was of course nonsense, and he proved it in the next moment by looming over us all and growling out, 'Lofthouse sends his regards.'" Wren felt his dawning horror at war with a fervent wish to have seen the looks on all the restive quills' faces as Butcher passed on his message. "So Vincent demanded his name," Humphreys continued, "and you'd have thought he'd asked for the man's own firstborn son for how he smouldered at the question. But then he rumbled, 'Butcher,' and turned on his heel and stalked out. Well," Humphreys concluded with evident irritation, "does this account of your prank satisfy you? Or did your Butcher give you a better one?" "Not my prank," said Wren, still digesting the tale, "and not my Butcher either." Humphreys scoffed. "As you like it. But know this, the restive quills will not forget this offence. All that follows, sir, you will have brought down on your own head." Wren, who knew full well that what followed would likely be little more than a satirical sketch in the margins of whatever literature the quills produced in the coming year, resisted the urge to roll his eyes. Humphreys took a pinch of snuff without offering any to him. Not that Wren wanted it, but he knew from experience Humphreys delighted in the slight, and bid him an extraordinarily sarcastic good day as he whirled away from him. The 3 consecutive sneezes that resounded through the foyer after Wren had closed the door on him somewhat marred the impressive nature of his exit. Mr. Grigsby glanced up from his newspaper as Wren passed him on his way back to his own desk. "Glad tidings, I hope?" The question jerked Wren out of bizarre musings, and it took him a moment to respond. "Interesting tidings." Mr. Grigsby seemed pleased by this, and returned to his newspaper with no further questions, much to Wren's relief. Wren found no relief from his own mind, which continued apace in its theorizing on the matter of Butcher. Very little was accomplished in the way of clerking that afternoon, and on into the evening. The next day brought no relief from the ever-twisting coils of the mystery. Wren spent the day scratching surreptitious notes on scraps of paper whenever Mr. Grigsby wasn't watching, which was most of the time, to be perfectly honest. The sun rose and set somewhere beyond the fog over London. Mr. Grigsby invited Wren to dinner. Wren declined. Mr. Grigsby departed. Wren hunched over his desk and resumed his scribbling by candlelight. The downstairs bell rang. Wren's head shot up. His fevered brain flitted through the possibilities. Another visit from the restive quills demanding an explanation. Perhaps Felix had come again to beg, borrow, or steal in advance on his inheritance, hoping to find the servant more willing than the master. If so, Wren would prove him very much mistaken. More likely, Wren supposed, as he rose and stretched the stiffness from his bones, it was Mr. Grigsby who had left his ring of keys behind and required Wren to let him in so he might retrieve them. Wren opened the door. There before him, in all his medieval majesty, stood Butcher.
That was the 3rd chapter of O King Holly King, as narrated by Gary Furlong. If you enjoy what you've heard, you can find the complete audiobook on Audible, Chirp, Libro.fm, Spotify, or through your local library on Libby and Hoopla. Thank you for listening, and be sure to tune in next week for more Right Here, Right Queer.